Was Lucrezia Borgia history's most monstrous femme fatale, a poisoner who seduced her own family and turned the Vatican into a den of sin? Or was she merely a pawn, a young girl whose name was ruthlessly slandered by enemies and whose life was not her own? The truth, buried beneath 5 centuries of gossip, propaganda, and scandal, is far more complex and haunting than the simple legend. This is not a story of a saint or a sinner, but of a woman trapped in the gilded cage of ultimate power, and her name has echoed through history as a synonym for corruption. They didn't just crown a pope in 1492, they unleashed a dynasty that would make the devil himself blush. Rome, in the sweltering summer of that pivotal year, was a city where salvation and damnation were traded in the same breath. The stench of burning ballot slips mixed with the sacred scent of frankincense as Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia, a man of immense wealth and even greater ambition, bought his way to St. Peter's throne. Gold clinked in purses, promises were whispered in conspiratorial Latin, and when the white smoke finally rose over the Vatican, it carried the unmistakable scent of corruption. He became Pope Alexander VI, a Spanish wolf in shepherd's robes, and now commanded Christ's earthly kingdom. His children, a bold and brazen brood in an era of secret sins, would inherit far more than his blessing. They would inherit his ruthless ambition and his countless enemies. In the shadowy corridors of the Apostolic Palace, a young girl, barely on the cusp of womanhood, combed her golden hair. At just 13 years old, Lucrezia Borgia moved through the marble halls like sunlight-piercing stained glass, beautiful, ethereal, and dangerously unaware that her father was already preparing to auction her flesh to the highest bidder. She was named for a famous Roman noblewoman, Lucretia, who was celebrated for choosing death over dishonor. History would forever question whether this Borgia daughter made the opposite choice. Tutored in languages, poetry, and art, she was the picture of Renaissance refinement. But in the snake pit of Vatican politics, intelligence and beauty in a woman were not ornaments, they were weapons. And Lucrezia, whether she knew it or not, was being sharpened for battle. Her father, Alexander, surveyed his new papal kingdom not with the piety of a saint, but with the calculating eye of a Caesar reviewing his legions. The cardinals bowed their heads in false reverence, but their eyes shimmered with rebellion. The Italian nobility offered smiling congratulations while secretly sharpening their knives. The Spanish Borgias now ruled, but they were resented foreigners in a land that despised outside influence. Every feast could be their last supper, every alliance a potential betrayal. In this high-stakes chess game for souls and power, daughters were not children to be cherished, they were strategic weapons to be deployed. And then there was Cesare. Cesare Borgia, the Pope's eldest son, prowled the Vatican like a beautiful, restless predator. Forced into the cardinalate by his father's design, he was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly devoted to the Borgia vision of a consolidated empire. He wore the sacred red robes of a prince of the church while dreaming of secular crowns and military conquests. The political philosopher Machiavelli would later use him as the living model for the prince, a ruler who understood that morality was a luxury only the weak could afford. Cesare's gaze often fell upon his sister Lucrezia with an intensity that courtiers and enemies alike would later call an unnatural devotion. Was it the protective bond of a brother, the strategic assessment of a co-conspirator, or something far darker? The girl at the center of this growing storm remained an enigma, wrapped in silk and crowned with a fragile innocence that the Vatican was poised to shatter. The first move in the game, involving Lucrezia, was not long in coming. Giovanni Sforza arrived at the Vatican in 1493 like a lamb dressed for slaughter. He was 26, the Lord of Pesaro, and a nephew of the powerful Duke of Milan. He saw a glittering opportunity in marrying the Pope's daughter, a chance to tie his family's fortunes to the very throne of St. Peter. Alexander, however, saw only a temporary convenience, a fleeting alliance with the Sforzas that served his immediate needs. Neither man truly understood that they were signing a contract that would soon be written in blood. The wedding ceremony was a spectacle of breathtaking opulence, blazing with enough gold to ransom entire kingdoms. Lucrezia, still a child of 13, stood beside her older husband, like a porcelain doll positioned for display. Her silk gown rustled. The Latin prayers of the priests echoed off frescoed ceilings depicting saints and angels, and all the while, the witnesses whispered not of sanctity, but of the bride's otherworldly beauty. But in Renaissance Italy, beauty was a currency, and this transaction had already been calculated down to the last ducat. The marriage bed became a battlefield of unspoken expectations and quiet disappointments. Giovanni Sforza had anticipated a compliant child bride who would serve as a living, breathing treaty between his house and the papacy. Instead, he found himself wed to a girl who moved through the intricate web of Vatican politics with an instinctual grace that suggested she was born to this world of manipulation. Was her demeanor simple innocence? Or was she already a keen student in her father's court, learning the dark arts of statecraft and survival? The questions began to multiply like vermin in Rome's sewers, gnawing at the foundations of their union. For Lucrezia, the Vatican was not just a palace, it was her entire universe, a gilded labyrinth where power was the only true currency and family loyalty was the law. Her father, Pope Alexander VI, ruled this universe from a throne of spiritual authority and raw political will. He was a man of immense appetites and towering ambition, whose love for his children was inextricably tangled with his desire to build a Borgia dynasty that would dominate Italy. His favor was a sun that could nurture or scorch, and his children orbited him, basking in his warmth but forever wary of his shadow. Cesare Borgia, burning with an ambition that the cardinal's robes could not contain, was the most dangerous of these orbiting bodies. He was the engine of his father's political machinations, a man who believed that a well-placed dagger or a strategically spread rumor could achieve more than any army. The bond between this formidable brother and his sister was the subject of intense, whispered speculation. They were often seen together in the Vatican's gardens, deep in conversation, their golden heads close. To some, it was a touching picture of familial affection. To others, watching from the shadowed loggias, their intimacy seemed to cross an invisible line, fueling the first dark murmurs that would soon erupt into a public scandal. The political landscape of Italy was a chessboard in constant, violent motion, and Alexander VI was a grandmaster who was not afraid to sweep the pieces aside and reset the game. His alliance with the Sforzas, sealed by Lucrezia's marriage, quickly became outdated. A new, more powerful player had entered the Italian peninsula, the King of France. The French offered bigger bribes, more formidable military alliances, and a far more promising path to Borgia domination. Giovanni Sforza's family, traditional allies of Naples, were now enemies of this new French strategy. In the ruthless calculus of papal politics, yesterday's friends were tomorrow's obstacles, and obstacles had a habit of disappearing. The Pope needed Lucrezia free again, a pawn to be moved to a more advantageous square. The instrument of her freedom was an annulment, a process that required Alexander to commit perjury while wrapped in the sacred mantle of papal infallibility. In 1497, he declared before a compliant tribunal that Giovanni Sforza had been physically incapable of consummating the marriage, that the union had never been valid, and that Lucrezia was therefore still a virgin. The audacity of the claim was breathtaking. Giovanni's first wife had died in childbirth, living proof that his manhood functioned perfectly well. The Pope's mathematical logic crumbled under the slightest scrutiny, but in Rome, who dared to question the word of Christ's own representative on earth? For Giovanni, the humiliation was absolute. He was not only being cast aside, but publicly branded as impotent, a laughingstock in every court in Italy. His political utility had expired, and he was being discarded with a cruelty that was both personal and politically devastating. Enraged and cornered, Giovanni Sforza did not go quietly. His revenge arrived not with swords, but with words that would sear themselves into history and define Lucrezia Borgia for centuries to come. Standing before sympathetic noble courts and anyone who would listen, he unleashed a torrent of accusations that were so shocking they threatened to crack the very foundations of the papacy itself. He declared that the reason for the annulment was not his impotence, but the true, unspeakable reason the Pope wanted his daughter back. Lucrezia, he claimed, was committing incest with both her father, Alexander VI, and her brother, Cesare Borgia. The scandal hit Renaissance society like a lightning strike on a powder magazine. The imagery was too potent to ignore. Spanish outsiders, moral degenerates defiling the most sacred bonds of family, all while occupying the throne of St. Peter. It was the perfect propaganda for Alexander's Italian enemies, a story that painted the Borgias as monstrous invaders corrupting the heart of Christendom. But here is where the history blurs into something darker than simple slander. Giovanni Sforza had lived within the intimate confines of the Borgia household for 4 years. He had shared their meals, attended their private audiences, and witnessed moments when guards were dismissed and doors were locked. His accusations were not random shots in the dark. They were precise, venom-tipped arrows aimed at the family's most vulnerable spots. Why would a man risk utter destruction by making claims he could not, in some way, support? The questions hung in the air, toxic and persistent, as the rumors began their inexorable spread. The poison of Giovanni Sforza's accusation seeped through the stone walls of the Vatican and flowed out into the streets of Rome, carried by diplomats, merchants, and gossiping courtiers. In the salons of Naples and the palaces of Florence, the story was devoured with a mixture of horror and delight. The Borgias were feared, but they were also resented, and their humiliation became a spectator sport for the Italian elite. Every glance, every casual touch between Lucrezia and her family was now re-examined under this new, lurid light. When she laughed at one of Cesare's jokes, observers noted an unnatural intimacy. When she kissed her father's ringed hand in filial respect, courtiers detected a flicker of forbidden passion. Renaissance Italy, a society obsessed with appearances and reputation, was transforming normal family affection into a pornographic theatre for political gain. Yet, at the center of this growing storm, Lucrezia's reaction was not what her accusers might have expected. She did not deny the claims with the hysterical outrage of a woman wronged. Instead, she maintained a puzzling, almost unnerving composure. She smiled her enigmatic smile, attended to her duties, and changed the subject when pressed. Was this the serene dignity of someone who knew the allegations were too absurd to dignify with a response? Or was it the cold confidence of someone who understood that certain truths within the Borgia walls were too dangerous for public consumption? Her silence was a void, and into that void rushed every manner of speculation, further cementing her reputation as a creature of mysterious and dangerous passions. The political winds, however, waited for no scandal. With Lucrezia officially declared a virgin by papal decree, Alexander VI moved with brutal efficiency to secure his next alliance. The chosen pawn was Alfonso of Aragon, the handsome 17-year-old illegitimate son of the King of Naples. This union was a strategic masterstroke, intended to bind the powerful Kingdom of Naples to the Borgia cause, at least for as long as it was convenient. For Lucrezia, this second marriage, in the summer of 1498, was a transition from one gilded cage to another, but it offered a glimmer of something new. Alfonso was young, charming, and by all accounts, he gazed upon his papal bride with something akin to genuine affection, perhaps even love. He was dazzled by her beauty and her cultivated grace. For a brief, fleeting moment, it appeared that Lucrezia might find not just a political partner, but a husband who saw her as more than a diplomatic tool. She, in turn, seemed to respond to his youthful ardor. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that had not been there with Giovanni Sforza, a tentative hope that perhaps this chapter would be different. Their marriage bloomed like a delicate rose in a Vatican courtyard, beautiful, fragrant, but perpetually shadowed by the looming architecture of power and betrayal that surrounded it. Alfonso, for all his royal blood, was naive to the ruthless realities of the Borgia court. He believed his personal charm and his family's prestige would protect him. He did not understand that in Alexander's world, love was a fleeting sentiment and blood ties were only as strong as the political advantage they provided. Lucrezia, now a young woman of 18, was wiser. She had learned the hard lesson that her father's love was conditional. and that her brother Cesare's ambition was an all-consuming fire that could burn anyone who stood in its path. She navigated her new marriage with a mixture of hope and profound wariness, understanding that her loyalty was expected to lie first and foremost with the Borgia name. The couple's happiness was tragically short-lived. The fickle compass of papal politics began to spin once again. The French alliance, which Cesare so desperately coveted, required the destabilization of Naples, Alfonso's own homeland. Almost overnight, the young prince found himself transformed from a cherished son-in-law into a political liability. The friendly faces that had surrounded him at court now seemed to mask cold calculation. He was living in the lion's den, and the lions were beginning to growl. The atmosphere in the Vatican grew thick with tension. Lucrezia was caught in an impossible bind, torn between her duty as a wife and her indoctrinated loyalty to her family. Whispers of plots began to circulate, and Alfonso, sensing the shifting currents, grew fearful. He knew the Borgia reputation for eliminating obstacles. He knew that his very existence had become inconvenient. The stage was set for a tragedy that would plunge Lucrezia even deeper into the abyss of her legendary infamy. A bloody event that would seem to confirm her darkest reputation to the watching world. The end for Alfonso of Aragon began not with a whisper, but with the ring of steel on a Roman evening, on the steps of St. Peter's Basilica. On the 15th of July, 1500, he was set upon by a band of armed assailants. They were not common thieves. Their attack was precise and brutal, leaving the young prince stabbed multiple times and bleeding on the sacred stone. But they had not finished the job. Alfonso, clinging to life, was carried back to the Vatican, to the apartments he shared with his wife. It was a chilling decision to bring the wounded man back to the very heart of the power structure that likely ordered his murder. For weeks, he lay recuperating, nursed attentively by Lucrezia. This period became a strange, suspended interlude, a public performance of wifely devotion played out on a stage everyone knew was about to collapse. Lucrezia rarely left his side, changing his bandages, ensuring his food was safe, her face a mask of concern. Was this the genuine anguish of a woman fighting for her husband's life, or a carefully orchestrated act to absolve her of the blame she knew was coming? The Roman court watched, mesmerized by the macabre theater, waiting for the final act. It came with ruthless efficiency. As Alfonso grew stronger, his guards were gradually dismissed, his security stripped away under the plausible pretext of his improving health. Then, one day, a group of men led by Cesare Borgia's trusted agent, Michelotto Corella, entered the chamber. They found Alfonso alone and defenseless. Ignoring his pleas, they proceeded to strangle the young prince in his own bed. The deed was done not in the shadows of an alley, but in the papal apartments, a brazen declaration that the Borgias could kill with absolute impunity, even within their own home. When Lucrezia was informed, her reaction was immediate and visceral. She was said to have screamed, her cries echoing through the corridors, and then she descended into a state of such profound grief that she was inconsolable. Her long blonde hair was shorn, her fine clothes exchanged for mourning black. At his funeral, her sobs were so raw and unrestrained that they struck even the most cynical observers as genuine. This was not the performance of a political player. This was the sound of a heart breaking. But the question that has haunted historians ever since is this: what was the true source of her anguish? Was it solely the loss of a husband she had come to love? Or was it the horrifying realization of her own powerlessness, the crushing finality of her family's brutality, and the grim understanding that she was, and would always be, a pawn in their bloody game? The murder of Alfonso of Aragon was a turning point, not just in Lucrezia's life, but in her legend. Her profound grief did little to shield her from the storm of suspicion that followed. In the eyes of Rome and all of Europe, she was now irrevocably tainted. The whispers became shouts. Had she been a knowing accomplice? Did she drug his wine to make the assassin's task easier? Did she, with a subtle signal, dismiss the final guard, sealing her husband's fate? The circumstantial evidence was damning. The murder benefited the Borgias, clearing the path for a new, more advantageous French alliance. It was carried out with an intimacy that suggested inside knowledge, and Lucrezia, for all her tears, remained a Borgia. Her loyalty to the family that had just murdered her husband was, in the end, unwavering. She did not denounce her father or brother. She did not flee. She mourned, and then she obeyed. This complex tapestry of genuine sorrow and political compliance made her an enigma that no one could quite unravel. She was either a masterful actress or a tragically broken young woman, and the world has never been able to decide which. The death of Alfonso solidified the second pillar of her dark legend. She was not just a participant in incest, she was a husband killer, a woman who used poison and betrayal to clear her family's path. The fact that Alfonso was strangled, not poisoned, was a minor detail. In the popular imagination, Lucrezia's methods were always subtle, feminine, and deadly. Her reputation as the Borgia poisoner began to crystallize, a myth that would prove impossible to dispel, fed by the undeniable pattern of convenient deaths that always seemed to surround her family. In the wake of Alfonso's murder, the Vatican corridors, once a stage for Lucrezia's performative grief, grew cold with a new and chilling reality. The brief, hopeful chapter of her life was over, and she was now fully enmeshed in the brutal machinery of Borgia ambition. It was in this toxic atmosphere that one of the most enduring and sinister elements of her legend took root: the persona of Lucrezia, the poisoner. The rumor spread through Rome's whispering galleries with the speed of a plague, a tale of a beautiful, delicate woman who dealt death with the same grace with which she composed poetry. She was said to possess a hollow ring, a marvel of Renaissance craftsmanship and malevolent intent, which could be twisted to release a colorless, odorless powder into an enemy's wine cup. The image was irresistibly dramatic: the golden-haired daughter of the Pope, smiling sweetly across a banquet table as she dispensed to agonizing death while discussing art or theology. This myth was not born in a vacuum. It was nurtured by the undeniable and suspicious mortality rate of the Borgia's political opponents. Cardinals who dared to challenge Alexander's policies had a habit of dying suddenly from unexplained fevers. Noblemen who stood in the way of Cesare's territorial expansion would perish after attending a Borgia feast. The mathematics of death surrounding the family defied natural explanation, suggesting a sinister hand was guiding fate. Poison was the perfect weapon for the legends that were being woven around Lucrezia. In Renaissance Italy, it was considered a form of feminine warfare, requiring subtlety over strength, intimacy over confrontation. Unlike the public violence of a dagger or a sword, poison was secretive, patient, and allowed the perpetrator to maintain an alibi of innocence and concern. A woman could share a man's bed one night, and his death throes the next, making love and death dance together in the ultimate betrayal. This gendered stereotype fit the emerging narrative of Lucrezia perfectly. She could not wield a sword like her brother Cesare, so she must have mastered this more insidious art. Every mysterious death in the Borgia orbit was attributed to her hand, a testament to the power of a story that confirmed society's deepest fears about powerful, unscrupulous women. Even the death of her own brother, Juan, the Duke of Gandia, who was found floating in the Tiber with multiple stab wounds in 1497, was woven into this narrative. Though his murder was clearly the work of assassins, with Cesare being the prime suspect, popular gossip suggested that Lucrezia's poison had first weakened him, making the physical attack possible. The legend was so potent that it needed no evidence. It fed on suspicion and flourished in the absence of facts. Yet, beneath this growing mountain of scandal, a new and deeply personal mystery was unfolding within the Vatican walls. In 1501, a baby boy appeared in the Borgia household. His name was Giovanni, but history would remember him only as the Infans Romanus, the Roman child. There was no official announcement, no clear explanation of his parentage. He was simply there, another mouth to feed in a family already drowning in notoriety. The mystery deepened when Pope Alexander VI issued two contradictory papal bulls. The first, in September 1501, declared the infant was his own illegitimate son, born to an unnamed Roman woman. The second, just a year later, stunningly claimed the child was in fact the son of Cesare Borgia. Lucrezia, for her part, would later refer to the boy as her half-brother. But Rome's gossips, their appetites whetted by years of incest allegations, performed their own salacious calculations. The timing of the child's birth aligned perfectly with periods when Lucrezia was known to be in Rome. Between her marriages, was this child hers? If so, who was the father? Was it Perotto, a young chamberlain she was rumoured to have loved, who had himself died under mysterious circumstances? Or was this the living, breathing proof of the darkest rumours of all the fruit of an incestuous union with either her father or her brother? The child himself became a walking question mark in Borgia history. His very features are subject of intense scrutiny. He was said to resemble both Alexander and Cesare, but also to have Lucrezia's own golden hair and delicate features. He was raised in the Vatican with all the privileges of a prince, his disputed parentage doing nothing to diminish his status. A constant, silent reminder of the secrets that festered at the heart of Christendom's most powerful family. If the rumors of incest and poison were the whispers that haunted the Vatican's corridors by day, the events of the night of October 31st, 1501, were a scream that echoed throughout Europe. This was the infamous Banquet of Chestnuts, an event so brazen in its sacrilege that it would forever cement the Borgia legend in the annals of decadence and depravity. The details were recorded not by a scandalized enemy, but by the Vatican's own master of ceremonies, Johann Burchard, a man known for his dry, factual chronicles of papal affairs. His dispassionate tone makes the account all the more chilling. At the invitation of Cesare Borgia, 50 of Rome's most renowned prostitutes were brought to the Apostolic Palace for an evening of entertainment. The festivities began with the women dancing clothed, their silk gowns swirling as cardinals and high-ranking papal functionaries looked on, wine flowing freely. But this was merely the prelude. As the night progressed, the garments came off. The naked courtesans were made to crawl on their hands and knees across the marble floors, competing to gather scattered chestnuts that lay between the flames of burning candelabras. It was a scene of deliberate degradation, a human game designed for the amusement of the powerful. But the spectacle did not end there. Burchard's chronicle details how prizes, silken tunics, jeweled shoes, pieces of fine silver, were then announced for the men who could couple with the greatest number of these women. The hall, located within the sacred precincts of the Vatican, the very heart of Western Christendom, was transformed into a combination of a brothel and a gladiatorial arena, where flesh was the currency and papal favor the reward. The most disturbing detail, the one that would cling to Lucrezia's name for eternity, was her recorded presence at this event. According to Burchard, she did not merely witness the spectacle from a secluded balcony. She sat alongside her father, Pope Alexander VI, and her brother, Cesare, actively participating. She was described as observing the proceedings and even awarding prizes to the most enthusiastic performers. This single detail, recorded by a reliable official source, was a gift to the Borgia's enemies. It seemed to provide irrefutable proof that Lucrezia was not a reluctant observer of her family's moral decay, but an enthusiastic participant. Was she a captive audience, forced to attend by her domineering father and brother to project an image of family unity and corruption? Or did the young woman, now in her early 20s and already twice widowed under suspicious circumstances, genuinely find amusement in this pornographic theatre? Her presence at the Banquet of Chestnuts became the ultimate evidence for those who painted her as a creature of utter depravity. The scandal erupted across Europe with the force of a tidal wave. Kings and queens in distant courts read the reports with a mixture of pious horror and secret envy. Cardinals who had long opposed Alexander now had the perfect weapon, documented proof of papal debauchery that surpassed any previous accusation. The Borgia name became synonymous with a level of sacrilege that was almost unimaginable. The Banquet of Chestnuts was not an isolated incident, but rather the most extreme example of a culture of excess that had come to define Alexander's papacy. Burchard's own diary suggested that such entertainments, while perhaps not always so explicit, were a regular feature of life in the Borgia court. For Lucrezia, the fallout was immediate and severe. Her reputation, already stained by accusations of incest and murder, was now irrevocably poisoned. She was no longer just a dangerous woman. She was a symbol of the moral rot at the heart of the church itself. This presented a significant problem for her father, who was already negotiating her next marital alliance. How could he marry off a daughter whose name was now a byword for scandal across the continent? The answer, as always for the Borgias, lay in a combination of immense wealth and ruthless political pressure. The target was Alfonso d'Este, heir to the powerful and respected Duchy of Ferrara. The Este family was ancient, cultured, and deeply skeptical of this proposed union with the notorious papal daughter. The negotiations were less a courtship and more a transaction for damaged goods. The Borgias were forced to offer a colossal dowry of 100,000 ducats, a sum so vast it could fund a small war or build a cathedral. It was the price of scandal, and Alexander paid it without flinching. Yet, even gold was not enough to wash away the stains on Lucrezia's name. The Este family demanded one further, deeply humiliating condition: a certification of the bride's virginity. The farcical and humiliating spectacle of Lucrezia's virginity examination was a testament to the sheer power of Borgia gold and intimidation. Here was a woman who had been publicly married twice, who was the mother of a young son, Rodrigo, from her second marriage, and whose name was now synonymous with every form of sexual depravity imaginable. Yet, a group of physicians and matrons, Their silence and compliance, purchased by the Pope, officially certified that the Duchess of Ferrara was, in fact, a virgin. It was a lie so brazen that it mocked the very institution of marriage it was meant to sanctify. But in the world of Renaissance power politics, the appearance of propriety was often more valuable than truth itself. For Lucrezia, this final ordeal in Rome must have been a moment of profound degradation, a stark reminder that her body was not her own, but a political object to be inspected, certified, and sold. Her departure from Rome in early 1502 to begin her journey to Ferrara was poignant with unspoken emotions. She was leaving the only home she had ever known, the center of her family's power, but also the source of all her trauma and infamy. Most heartbreakingly, she was forced to leave her 3-year-old son, Rodrigo, behind in the Vatican under her father's care. The separation was a political necessity. The Este family would not welcome a living reminder of her previous annulled marriage. As her entourage moved north, observers noted her genuine tears, a mixture of maternal loss and the anxiety of stepping into a future where her notorious past had already arrived before her. The journey to Ferrara was a procession through a gauntlet of curiosity and judgment. In every town, people gathered to catch a glimpse of the legendary Borgia daughter, the poisoner, the alleged participant in incest, the woman who had watched the banquet of chestnuts. Her golden hair, catching the winter light, became a beacon that drew stares of fascination and fear. Peasants and nobles alike wondered if such an angelic face could truly hide a demonic soul. She was entering a new world. The court of Ferrara, under the Este family, was one of the most sophisticated and culturally vibrant in Italy. It was a world that valued poetry, music, and art over the brutal dagger in the dark politics of the Vatican. The Estes were seasoned rulers, their power built on centuries of stable governance, not on the recent, bloody ascent of a foreign pope. They had accepted this marriage for the immense dowry and the political connection to the papacy, but they received Lucrezia with a polite, cold skepticism. The wedding ceremony in Ferrara was a study in contrast to the opulent Borgia spectacles. It was magnificent, yet restrained, reflecting the established, confident nobility of the Este dynasty. The local nobles in attendance were not there to celebrate, but to evaluate, their eyes scrutinizing their new duchess as if she were a valuable but potentially flawed acquisition. For Lucrezia, this new environment presented both a daunting challenge and an unprecedented opportunity. Here, far from the shadow of her father and brother, she could potentially reinvent herself. She was no longer just a papal daughter. She was the Duchess of Ferrara, a position of immense responsibility and influence in its own right. And initially, she seemed to grasp this chance. She immersed herself in the cultural life of the court, employing her considerable education and intellect. She became a patron of poets and artists, including the renowned Pietro Bembo, with whom she began a celebrated and intense correspondence. Their letters, which survive to this day, are masterpieces of Renaissance sentiment, filled with lofty ideals of love and intellectual companionship. Bembo praised her mind in terms usually reserved for male scholars, and their relationship appeared to offer Lucrezia the kind of respectful, cerebral admiration she had likely never known. Yet, even in this new life, the old shadows stretched long. The court of Ferrara was not immune to gossip, and Lucrezia's natural warmth and intelligence, when directed toward men like Bembo or her charismatic brother-in-law, Francesco Gonzaga, the Marquis of Mantua, were immediately interpreted through the lens of her past. Whispers of new affairs began to circulate almost as soon as she had settled in. Were these the innocent friendships of a cultured woman? Or was the Borgia poisoner simply finding new victims in a new court? The pattern of her life seemed inescapable. Just as stability seemed within reach, the spectre of scandal, whether earned or manufactured, rose once again to meet her. The relative peace of Lucrezia's new life in Ferrara was shattered by a series of earth-shattering events that began to dismantle the very power structure that had defined her existence. The first and most profound was the death of her father, Pope Alexander VI, in August 1503. The official cause was recorded as malaria, but rumors, ever fertile where the Borgias were concerned, immediately suggested he had been poisoned. The most popular theory was that he and Cesare had accidentally consumed a poisoned bottle of wine intended for a wealthy cardinal they planned to rob. The irony was exquisite. The master of poison, allegedly felled by his own weapon. Whatever the truth, the formidable sun around which the Borgia planets orbited had been extinguished. The news reached Lucrezia in Ferrara, and by all accounts, she was devastated. Despite his manipulation and the impossible situations he had placed her in, Alexander had been a loving father in his own ruthless way, the central pillar of her world. His death left her politically exposed and emotionally adrift. The downfall was swift and brutal. Without their patriarch's iron will and political genius, the Borgia Empire crumbled. Cesare, though physically recovering from the same illness that killed his father, was politically crippled. He had built his power entirely on the foundation of the papacy, and with a new pope, the hostile Pius III, and then Julius II, elected, he was stripped of his titles, his lands, and his influence. The beautiful predator was now a hunted man, forced to flee Italy. For Lucrezia, this was a cataclysmic shift. The Borgia name, once a shield and a weapon, was now a liability. She was no longer the powerful papal daughter, but the sister of a disgraced and fleeing criminal. Her position in Ferrara, always precarious, became dangerously unstable. Her husband, Alfonso d'Este, was a pragmatic man. He had married her for the Borgia alliance and the immense dowry. With that alliance now dissolved into dust and scandal, he had little personal or political incentive to protect her. There were serious discussions about annulling the marriage and sending her back to Rome in disgrace. Lucrezia faced the greatest crisis of her life. For the first time, she could not rely on her father or brother to orchestrate her survival. She was utterly alone, a woman in her early 20s with the most notorious name in Europe, fighting for her position and her life in a court that now saw her as a burden. It was in this desperate hour that a new Lucrezia began to emerge from the ashes of the old. The pawn, it turned out, had been learning the game her entire life. She shed the last vestiges of the manipulated girl and began to fight with all the political intelligence and grace she had absorbed in the Vatican. She carefully cultivated alliances within the Ferrarese court, winning over key nobles with her charm and patronage. She leaned into her role as duchess, involving herself in the governance of the city and its cultural life with a newfound seriousness. Most importantly, she demonstrated unwavering loyalty to her adopted home and to Alfonso himself. Her ultimate test came with the final, tragic act of her brother Cesare's life. After years of wandering and imprisonment, Cesare was killed in a minor skirmish in the Kingdom of Navarre in 1507. The brilliant, ruthless prince who had dreamed of uniting Italy died ignobly, cut down by anonymous soldiers. For Lucrezia, this was the final severing of her past. The complex, intense bond with her brother, whether of blood, of conspiracy, or of something darker, was forever broken. In Ferrara, she observed the official mourning period for her brother with dignity, but she did not allow his death to destabilize her hard-won position. She understood that her future now lay entirely with the Este family. Her transformation from a Borgia pawn into an Este matriarch was solidified through motherhood. Over the following years, she would bear Alfonso d'Este several children, securing the dynasty's succession. This, more than anything, cemented her place in Ferrara. She was no longer just a wife. She was the mother of the future rulers. The woman once accused of poisoning husbands was now a devoted and capable mother, overseeing the education and upbringing of her children with a care that stood in stark contrast to the legends of her youth. She had navigated the collapse of her birth family and, through sheer force of will and political savvy, had secured her position in her married one. The survivor had finally outlived the spectre of her name. With the Borgia dynasty dissolved and her place in Ferrara secured, Lucrezia embarked on the second and longest act of her life, the deliberate and calculated construction of her legacy. The golden-haired siren of Vatican scandal deliberately receded, replaced by the figure of a devout, capable, and cultured Renaissance duchess. This was not merely a change of circumstance, but a conscious reinvention. She immersed herself in the governance of Ferrara, acting as a regent in her husband's frequent absences, proving herself an able and judicious administrator. She managed estates, settled disputes, and won the respect of the Ferrarese people through her competent and fair rule. But her most powerful tools in this campaign of rehabilitation were patronage and piety. Lucrezia became one of the great patrons of the arts in early 16th century Italy. She transformed the Ferrara court into a brilliant center of humanist learning and artistic innovation, surrounding herself with poets like Pietro Bembo and Ariosto, and supporting painters and musicians. Her correspondence with Bembo, though their romantic relationship likely remained largely platonic and epistolary, became a celebrated artifact of the Renaissance, showcasing a woman of refined taste and intellectual depth. This was a world away from the whispers of poison and incest. This was the portrait of a civilized and enlightened ruler. Concurrent with her cultural patronage, was a very public and profound turn toward religion. The woman who had allegedly turned the Vatican into a brothel now devoted herself to the church with striking fervor. She became a patroness of convents, most notably the Corpus Domini in Ferrara, where she would spend increasing amounts of time in prayer and contemplation. She corresponded with religious reformers, involved herself in church affairs, and was known for her acts of charity toward the poor and the sick. This deep and very visible religiosity served a dual purpose. In an age where personal piety was seen as a marker of good character, it was the most effective way to counter the grotesque allegations of her past. But it also seems to have been genuine. After a life filled with forced marriages, political betrayal, and violent loss, the structured solace of the church may have offered her a peace and a sense of purpose that the secular world never could. Her religious devotion became the cornerstone of her new identity, a sustained effort to wash away the stains of her Borgia name with acts of faith. However, the past is a ghost that is never fully exorcised. Despite her 3 decades of exemplary conduct in Ferrara, the shadow of her legend followed her to the grave and beyond. Every charitable act was scrutinized by her contemporaries. Was her patronage of the church a genuine search for redemption, or the calculated penance of a woman with a guilty conscience? When she withdrew to the convent, was it for spiritual comfort, or to escape the judgments of the court? Renaissance Italy had convicted her in the court of public opinion decades earlier, and a lifetime of subsequent virtue could not completely overturn the verdict. The myth of the monstrous Lucrezia was simply too potent, too useful, and too entertaining to be discarded by facts. Her death in 1519, at the age of 39 from childbirth complications, sparked a final, bitter round of speculation. Preachers and gossips alike saw her premature passing as divine judgment, a delayed punishment for the sins of her youth. Had God finally collected his debt from the papal daughter who had transgressed every boundary? Even in death, she could not be simply a devout duchess who had died in the painful, commonplace act of bringing new life into the world. Her funeral, for all its solemnity, became one last opportunity for moral commentary on the wages of sin and the elusive nature of forgiveness. The woman who had spent her final years in prayer and service was, in the end, still remembered by many as Lucrezia Borgia, the great sinner. The reputation she had worked so hard to rebuild in life was instantly fragile in the face of her enduring legend. The enduring fascination with Lucrezia Borgia hinges on a single, unanswerable question. Who was she, truly? To examine the evidence is to stare into a historical hall of mirrors, where fact and slander reflect each other until all clarity is lost. The 3 pillars of her infamy, incest, poisoning, and depravity each collapse under modern forensic scrutiny, yet leave behind a residue of unsettling doubt. Take the incest allegations, the most damning charge of all. The primary source was a humiliated and vengeful first husband, Giovanni Sforza, whose testimony was perfectly timed to cause maximum political damage to the family that discarded him. There exists not a single piece of corroborating contemporary evidence from a neutral source. The Borgias were a physically affectionate family, and their Spanish customs might have seemed unusually intimate to more reserved Italian courtiers, providing fertile ground for their enemies to weaponize normal behavior. Yet, the persistence of the rumor and the strange, claustrophobic dynamics of the Vatican court leave a sliver of ambiguity. Could a man like Giovanni Sforza have risked everything on a complete fabrication, with no kernel of observed behavior to give his claims credibility? The poisoning legend is equally fraught. It is a classic case of a gendered narrative imposed on a pattern of convenient deaths. The hollow ring is a theatrical prop with no basis in historical evidence, a detail that emerges from later sensationalist accounts, not from contemporary inventories or witness reports. Poison was the preferred accusation for any mysterious death in Renaissance Italy, especially when the suspected perpetrator was a woman, as it aligned with contemporary fears of feminine wiles and hidden violence. The undeniable fact is that Alexander VI and Cesare Borgia did have an alarming number of political enemies die suddenly. A systematic elimination was undoubtedly taking place, but to attribute this to Lucrezia personally is a leap. Cesare had his own agents, like the infamous Michelotto Corella, to carry out such tasks. The Borgia men needed no poison ring. They had armies, assassins, and absolute power. Attributing these deaths to Lucrezia allowed society to process the terrifying ambition of the Borgia men by framing it through the more familiar, and perhaps more containable, lens of a wicked woman's treachery. Finally, the depravity, exemplified by the banquet of chestnuts. There is no doubt the event occurred. It was documented by the reliable Johann Burchard. Lucrezia's presence is recorded, but her role is less clear. Was she an enthusiastic participant, or a young woman trapped by filial duty, forced to sit through a degrading spectacle orchestrated by her father and brother to project an image of total family unity in their transgressions? In a court where disobeying the Pope or crossing Cesare could be fatal, her compliance is not necessarily proof of her complicity. Her entire life had been a lesson in obedience. To read her attendance as wholehearted approval is to ignore the profound lack of agency afforded to even the most privileged Renaissance women. The banquet was almost certainly a power play by Cesare and Alexander, a demonstration of their utter control over morals, bodies, and the sacred space of the Vatican itself. Lucrezia was likely just another piece on their board, her presence a symbolic part of their display. The historical Lucrezia that emerges from the non-polemical records of her time in Ferrara is a woman of intelligence, administrative skill, and deep religious conviction. She was a respected ruler, a devoted mother, and a generous patron. This person is utterly incompatible with the monster of legend. The truth likely lies not in the extremes, but in the vast, grey expanse between them. She was neither the demonic seductress nor the saintly victim. She was a complex product of a brutal time, a woman of high intelligence born into a family of unparalleled ambition and moral flexibility. She was used, manipulated, and slandered, but she was also a member of that inner circle, privy to its secrets and complicit in its silence. She learned to navigate impossible circumstances, first as a pawn, and later as a survivor who mastered the game herself. Her story is not one of clear guilt or innocence, but a tragic narrative of a life shaped by forces far beyond her control, and a name forever scarred by the brutal politics of the Renaissance. If the historical Lucrezia Borgia remains an enigma, then her legacy is a powerful lesson in how history is written not by the victors, but by the storytellers. The myth of the monstrous Lucrezia was not cemented in the courts of Renaissance Italy, but in the inkwells of later artists and authors who found in her story the perfect archetype for their own purposes. The most influential of these was undoubtedly the 19th century French novelist Alexandre Dumas. Writing in an age that romanticized Gothic horror and medieval scandal, Dumas presented Lucrezia not as a complex historical figure, but as a definitive villainess. In his celebrated Crimes, he declared with shocking certainty that she was an unfaithful woman by nature, the daughter and mistress of her father, and the same with her brother. Dumas possessed no new evidence. He simply repackaged the centuries-old propaganda of the Borgia enemies and presented it as established fact. His genius for dramatic narrative, however, gave his words an authority that dry historical chronicles could never match. He painted a picture of such captivating depravity that it became the dominant popular image of Lucrezia for generations, proving that a compelling lie often travels further and endures longer than a complicated, ambiguous truth. This image was simultaneously refined by the Romantic poets, most notably Lord Byron. Where Dumas saw a monster, Byron saw a tragic, darkly romantic heroine. In 1816, during his travels through Italy, he committed an act that perfectly encapsulates this obsession. He stole several locks of Lucrezia's hair from a display in the Ambrosian Library in Milan. He described the hair as the prettiest and fairest imaginable, and he pored over her surviving letters, calling them the most beautiful ever written. For Byron, Lucrezia was the ultimate forbidden fantasy, a beautiful, intelligent woman stained by sin, a combination of the angelic and the demonic that was irresistibly seductive to the romantic sensibility. His fetishization of her relics and his praise for her literary talents completed her transformation from a historical person into a timeless symbol of dangerous beauty and tragic passion. The poisoner and incestuous woman was now also a muse. Between Dumas' grotesque caricature and Byron's romantic idolization, the real Lucrezia, the administrator, the patron, the mother, was completely erased. Her story was no longer about her life, but about what she represented to later ages: fears of feminine power, corruption within the family, and the moral decay of institutions. In the 20th and 21st centuries, the pendulum has swung once more. Modern historians, armed with more rigorous methods and a greater sensitivity to the context of women's lives, have undertaken a significant rehabilitation of Lucrezia's character. Biographers like Maria Bellonci and Sarah Bradford have sifted through the archives, separating the scant factual record from the mountainous heap of accusation. They emphasize her political powerlessness as a young woman, her remarkable resilience, and her successful reign as Duchess of Ferrara. The focus has shifted from the sensational crimes she may or may not have committed to the tangible achievements of her later life. Her diplomatic skill, her cultural patronage, and her administrative competence. This scholarly reassessment, however, struggles to compete with the enduring power of the myth. Popular culture, from Victor Hugo's plays to the Showtime television series The Borgias, continues to favor the narrative of poison, passion, and papal corruption. The phrase Borgia poison still evokes a shiver of dark glamour, and Lucrezia remains its most famous alleged practitioner. This is because the legend serves a deeper psychological function. Lucrezia Borgia, the myth, is a vessel for our perennial anxieties about the corrupting nature of absolute power, the hidden dangers of female sexuality, and the dark secrets that can fester within the most powerful families. A nuanced historical portrait of a competent Italian duchess does not satisfy this primal hunger for a story that explores the extremes of human behavior. The true legacy of Lucrezia Borgia, therefore, is not a single truth, but a dialogue between fact and fiction, between the woman she was and the monster we need her to be. Her story forces us to confront how we write history and whose voices we choose to amplify. Do we listen to the vengeful accusations of her first husband, or do we study the quiet record of her governance in Ferrara? Do we focus on the one night of the banquet of chestnuts, or on the decades of religious devotion that followed? The evidence for her innocence is as circumstantial as the evidence for her guilt. In the end, we are left with a choice. We can see her as a victim of her family's ambition and her enemies' propaganda, a woman who overcame a horrific reputation to build a life of dignity and purpose. Or we can see her as a willing participant in the Borgia system, a survivor who did what was necessary, even if it meant tolerating or even enabling evil. Perhaps the most honest conclusion is that she was both a product of a world where such contradictions were not just possible, but necessary for survival. Her enduring fascination lies in this very ambiguity. She is a mirror, and what we see in her says as much about our own fears and fascinations as it does about the woman who lived over 500 years ago. The final, and perhaps most telling, chapter of Lucrezia Borgia's life was written not in scandal, but in quiet, sustained achievement. After the dramatic collapse of her birth family, the woman who had been a symbol of papal corruption became one of the most effective and beloved rulers in Ferrara's history. Her transformation was not an act, but a revelation of her true character, freed from the toxic influence of the Borgia court. As the Duchess of Ferrara, she evolved into a capable regent, often governing the duchy with skill and foresight during the frequent absences of her husband, Alfonso, who was preoccupied with military and diplomatic affairs. She managed complex financial matters, mediated disputes among the nobility, and oversaw agricultural and economic projects that benefited the entire region. The same intelligence that was once feared as a tool for manipulation in Rome was now hailed as a gift for administration in Ferrara. Her court became a model of Renaissance refinement and learning, a magnet for artists, poets, and philosophers who found in her a generous and discerning patron. She had not merely escaped her past, she had built a new world to replace it, a world defined by culture and governance, rather than conspiracy and murder. Her personal life, too, found a stability that must have seemed unimaginable in her youth. While her marriage to Alfonso d'Este was a political match, it matured into a partnership of mutual respect and shared duty. The birth of her children, particularly her sons Ercole II and Ippolito II, secured the Este lineage and her own position irrevocably. She was a devoted and attentive mother, deeply involved in their education and upbringing. This stands in stark contrast to the legends of the unnatural woman who abandoned her first son, Rodrigo. The historical record in Ferrara shows a woman for whom family was a source of strength and purpose, not a political tool. Her extensive correspondence reveals a deep concern for her children's health, their studies, and their futures. The image of Lucrezia reading to her children, or overseeing their lessons in the Ferrara Palace, is a powerful and too often ignored counterpoint to the infamous image of her at the banquet of chestnuts. It proves that people are not monolithic. They contain multitudes, capable of both darkness and light, and are profoundly shaped by their environment. It was in her final years that these two threads of her life, the notorious past and the redeemed present, became intertwined in a poignant dance. The deeply religious piety that had characterized her time in Ferrara intensified. She spent increasing amounts of time in the convent of Corpus Domini, not as a political gesture, but as a genuine search for spiritual solace. She took to wearing a hair shirt, a garment of rough cloth worn against the skin as a penance, and dedicated herself to prayer and charitable works. Was this the guilt of a sinner seeking absolution for crimes of incest and murder? Or was it the response of a soul that had endured unimaginable trauma, the murders of her loved ones, the relentless slander, the loss of her children seeking comfort and meaning in the divine? Her piety can be read as the final, powerful act of self-creation. By embracing the church so fully, she was publicly defining herself not as a Borgia, but as a faithful Christian, rewriting her own identity in the language of devotion. Her death in 1519, from complications following the birth of her 8th child, was met with genuine mourning in Ferrara. The city that had once viewed her with suspicion now honored her as a wise and compassionate duchess. The legends of the poisoner and the seductress seemed to belong to another person, a ghost from a distant nightmare past. And so, we are left at her graveside, faced with the ultimate, unanswerable question. The evidence for her innocence is compelling. The clear political motives of her accusers, the lack of any concrete proof, her 3 decades of exemplary rule. Yet, the evidence for a more complex, complicit figure is also persuasive. Her proximity to so many convenient deaths, her enigmatic silence in the face of heinous accusations, her unwavering loyalty to a father and brother capable of any evil. The truth is not a switch to be flipped, revealing either light or dark. The truth about Lucrezia Borgia is a tapestry woven with threads of both. She was likely a young woman of her time, born into a family that operated by a brutal moral code, who did what she had to do to survive. She may not have personally poisoned anyone, but she lived in a system that did, and she benefited from its outcomes. She almost certainly did not commit incest, but she understood the corrupt dynamics of her family and learned to navigate them. She was both a victim of her circumstances and an agent within them. To paint her as a monster is to ignore the resilient, intelligent ruler she became. To paint her as a saintly victim is to ignore the harsh realities of the world she inhabited. Her story endures precisely because it refuses to offer easy answers, forcing us to sit with the discomfort of ambiguity, and to recognize that in the shadows of history, the most fascinating characters are those we can never fully know. The story of Lucrezia Borgia does not end with her death in 1519. In many ways, that is where her most enduring life began. The battle for her soul, fought across the pages of history, art, and popular culture, reveals less about the woman she was and more about the societies that have resurrected her. For centuries, the dominant narrative was the one crafted by her enemies and embellished by writers like Alexandre Dumas. Lucrezia the poisoner, the incestuous daughter, the Vatican seductress. This image served a clear purpose. During the Counter-Reformation and beyond, she became a potent symbol for Protestants criticizing the corruption of the papacy and for moralists warning of the dangers of unchecked female power. She was a convenient villain, a historical scapegoat upon whom the sins of a tumultuous era could be heaped. Her complexity was flattened into a caricature, a cautionary tale that was easy to understand and satisfying to condemn. This version of Lucrezia required no nuance. She was simply evil, and her story was a simple morality play about the wages of sin. The 20th century, however, witnessed a dramatic shift. The rise of feminism and more rigorous historical scholarship prompted a long overdue re-evaluation. Historians like Ferdinand Gregorovius began the process, but it was Maria Bellonce's seminal 1939 biography, The Life and Times of Lucrezia Borgia, that truly championed her rehabilitation. Bellonce meticulously sifted through archives, separating the documented actions of the Duchess of Ferrara from the salacious gossip about the papal daughter. She presented Lucrezia not as a monster, but as a political pawn, a survivor, and ultimately, a successful ruler in her own right. This reinterpretation was groundbreaking. It shifted the focus from the unproven crimes of her youth to the tangible accomplishments of her adulthood. The narrative was no longer about what was done to her or what she allegedly did, but about what she achieved despite it all. This scholarly reassignment has continued with modern biographers like Sarah Bradford, who further solidified the image of Lucrezia as a capable, intelligent, and resilient woman navigating a man's world. Yet, the scholarly Lucrezia has struggled to capture the public imagination with the same force as the legendary one. Popular culture remains firmly in the grip of the myth. From Victor Hugo's 1833 play Lucrezia Borgia, which cemented her as a tragic but monstrous figure, to the 2011 Showtime television series, The Borgias, which revels in the opulent depravity of the family. The allure of poison, incest, and sacrilege is simply too powerful to resist. These adaptations are not concerned with historical accuracy, They are concerned with drama and the dramatic potential of a beautiful, dangerous woman at the heart of the Renaissance papacy is limitless. The legendary Lucrezia is a commodity, a brand that sells books, fills cinema seats, and drives television ratings. She is a familiar archetype, the femme fatale. The real Lucrezia, the one who administered a duchy, corresponded with poets, and raised children, lacks the same immediate, visceral appeal. The truth is, in a sense, boring compared to the lie. This creates a fascinating dichotomy. We now have two parallel Lucrezias existing in the modern consciousness, the historian's duchess and the pop culture poisoner. They are often irreconcilable. One is a portrait in shades of grey, a study in survival and reinvention. The other is a stark black and white image of villainy. This duality is perhaps the most accurate reflection of her legacy. It acknowledges that the full, objective truth is lost to time, and that we are left with fragments and interpretations. Our continuing obsession with her story speaks to timeless human fascinations, the corrupting influence of absolute power, the dark secrets of famous families, and the perceived danger of a woman who steps outside the bounds of prescribed morality. Lucrezia Borgia's name is no longer just a reference to a historical figure. It has become a shorthand, a symbol. To invoke her is to invoke a world of hidden poison, forbidden love, and the ultimate betrayal of trust. She is a canvas upon which we project our own anxieties about power, gender, and morality. The real woman, with her hopes, her intelligence, her grief, and her faith, may be forever obscured, but the legend she inspired continues to live, breathe, and terrify us in equal measure. To understand the enduring power of Lucrezia Borgia's story, one must look beyond the historical facts and into the realm of archetype and collective psychology. She has transcended her own life to become a permanent fixture in the Western imagination, a symbol that resonates with deep-seated fears and fascinations. At her core, the legendary Lucrezia embodies the archetype of the dangerous woman. She is the beautiful, intelligent female whose power is not overt and political, like a queen leading an army, but subtle, intimate, and therefore, to the patriarchal societies of both her time and ours, deeply unsettling. Her alleged weapons were not swords but poison. Her battleground was not the field, but the marriage bed and the dinner table. This taps into a primal fear of feminine betrayal, the idea that the very sources of life and comfort, a wife, a daughter, could be the instruments of death. The Borgia mythos takes this further, positioning the family itself, the fundamental unit of society, as a site of corruption. The accusations of incest are the ultimate violation, suggesting a moral rot so profound it perverts the most sacred bonds. This narrative of a corrupted family in the highest seat of religious power is a story of apocalyptic collapse, one that never fails to horrify and captivate. Furthermore, Lucrezia's legend serves as a powerful commentary on the nature of history itself. Her story is a case study in how a reputation is manufactured. It demonstrates that historical truth is often not a fixed point, but a narrative shaped by the victors, or in this case, by the most persuasive storytellers. The Borgias ultimately fell from power, and their enemies, the Della Rovere, the Sforzas, the chroniclers who despised their Spanish origins, were left to write the first draft of their history. Lucrezia, as a visible and vulnerable woman, was an easy target. Her reputation was collateral damage in a much larger political and cultural war. This process is not confined to the Renaissance. It happens in every era. We see public figures demonized or sanctified by media narratives, their complexities erased in favor of a simple, marketable story. Lucrezia's life reminds us to question the sources, to look for the motivations behind the accusations, and to understand that the loudest voices in the historical record are not always the most truthful. Her story also forces a confrontation with moral relativism. Can we, from our modern standpoint of individual rights and gender equality, truly judge a woman who lived in a world where she had so little agency? The luxury of moral choice was scarcely available to a Renaissance noblewoman, whose body and destiny were property of her family. To condemn Lucrezia for not rebelling against her father and brother is to ignore the brutal reality that such rebellion would have meant ruin or death. Her survival required a degree of compliance that we, from our comfortable modern perspective, may find morally compromising. This does not absolve her of all potential guilt, but it demands a more empathetic and contextual understanding. Her life becomes a mirror reflecting our own moral frameworks and challenging us to consider what we would have done in her gilded cage. It asks the uncomfortable question: how many of us, when faced with the choice between survival and moral purity, would have the strength to choose the latter? Finally, The endless fascination with Lucrezia Borgia speaks to our innate desire for mystery. In an age of information, where so much is known and quantified, the unresolved questions of her life are tantalizing. The lack of definitive proof for the most salacious allegations creates a vacuum, and nature and human imagination abhors a vacuum. We are compelled to fill it with our own theories, our own fictions. The mystery is the engine of her enduring fame. She is a historical puzzle with missing pieces, and we cannot resist trying to fit the fragments together, even if we have to create a few of our own. The real Lucrezia Borgia is ultimately unknowable, a silhouette seen through a stained glass window, backlit by the fires of scandal. We can trace the outline of her life, her births, her marriages, her children, her death, but the inner woman, her thoughts, her desires, her guilt, or her innocence, remains shrouded, and perhaps that is for the best. It is the mystery that gives her story its power, its poetry, and its timeless ability to make us wonder, to question, and to shudder at the darkness that can lie behind a beautiful face. As the final chapter closes on the life of Lucrezia Borgia, we are left not with answers, but with the profound echo of her name and the countless questions it continues to raise. Her journey from a papal pawn in the corrupt heart of Rome to a revered and pious duchess in Ferrara is one of the most remarkable transformations in history. We have traversed the landscape of her legend, from the venomous accusations of incest and poisoning to the documented evidence of her intelligence, administrative skill, and deep religious faith. We have seen her as a child bride, a grieving widow, a political prisoner in her own home, and finally, as a matriarch who carved out a domain of influence and respect. The woman who emerges from the full scope of her life is a study in contrasts and survival, a figure who cannot be easily categorized or dismissed. To reduce her to a single label, whether villain or victim, is to do a disservice to the complex reality of her existence and the brutal world she navigated with such resilience. The evidence, when weighed with a clear eye, leans heavily in favor of a significant rehabilitation of her character. The incest allegations, her most damning legacy, originate from a single, deeply biased source, with everything to gain from destroying her family's reputation. The complete absence of any corroborating evidence from neutral contemporaries is telling. The poisoning legends, while rooted in a pattern of convenient Borgia deaths, align perfectly with gendered stereotypes of the era and lack any concrete connection to Lucrezia personally. The infamous banquet of chestnuts, while likely true in its occurrence, places her in a role that can be interpreted as one of forced compliance rather than enthusiastic participation. Against these charges, we must place the undeniable record of her 3 decades in Ferrara, a period of stable rule, cultural flourishing, devout piety, and dedicated motherhood. This was not the life of a monster. It was the life of a ruler, a patron, and a faithful servant of her people and her God. The sheer weight and consistency of this positive record from her adult life powerfully counterbalances the salacious, politically motivated gossip of her youth. Yet, a sliver of historical doubt remains, and it is this doubt that gives the story its enduring power. Could anyone live in the heart of such a notoriously ruthless and amoral family as the Borgias and remain entirely untouched by its methods? Her silence in the face of the gravest accusations is puzzling. Her unwavering loyalty to a father and brother who were capable of murder and betrayal on a grand scale suggests a moral compromise, a willing acceptance of the dark necessities of Borgia power. Perhaps the most honest assessment is that Lucrezia was neither a demon nor a saint, but a survivor. She was a product of her environment, who learned to play the hand she was dealt with, the tools available to her. In her youth, those tools were her beauty, her acquiescence, and her silence. In her maturity, they were her intellect, her administrative genius, and her faith. She made choices within an impossibly constrained set of options, and she emerged not just alive, but triumphant, having forged a legacy far beyond the one she was born into. Her story is more than a biography. It is a lens through which we examine 500 years of changing attitudes towards women, power, and history itself. She has been a Protestant propaganda tool, a romantic poet's muse, a Victorian villainess, a feminist reclamation project, and a television soap opera star. Each era has reinvented her to serve its own needs and reflect its own anxieties. This constant reinterpretation proves that Lucrezia Borgia is not a fixed point in history, but a living conversation. She challenges us to think critically about the sources of history, to recognize the power of narrative, and to approach the past with both empathy and a healthy skepticism. She forces us to acknowledge the vast grey areas of human experience where clear-cut heroes and villains are a fantasy, and where understanding is found not in judgment, but in the difficult, nuanced work of contextualization. The echo of Lucrezia Borgia will continue to resonate as long as we are fascinated by the mysteries of power, the complexities of family, the constraints of gender, and the eternal, elusive quest to uncover the truth about the human heart, especially when it beats in the shadow of a throne. So, who was the real Lucrezia Borgia? After this journey through the opulent halls and blood-stained corridors of her life, the most honest conclusion is that the question itself may be the wrong one to ask. The real Lucrezia is a phantom, forever obscured by the dense fog of time, propaganda, and our own human need for definitive stories. We are left not with a solved historical equation, but with a profound and lasting legacy, a legacy that is, in many ways, more powerful and instructive than any single truth could ever be. Lucrezia Borgia endures not because we know who she was, but precisely because we cannot. She is the ultimate historical Rorschach test. We look at the inkblots of her life, the annulments, the murders, the banquets, the piety, the patronage, and we see reflected back at us our own beliefs about power, femininity, sin, and redemption. Her story is a canvas upon which we have painted our deepest fears and fascinations for half a millennium. Perhaps, then, the final verdict on Lucrezia is not a judgment of her character, but an acknowledgement of her symbolic power. She represents the terrifying and alluring potential of the feminine when unleashed from societal constraints, a potential that patriarchal history has often sought to control by labeling it monstrous. She embodies the chilling reality that the institutions we hold most sacred, the family, the church, can be hollowed out from within by the very people who lead them. And she stands as a timeless testament to the human capacity for reinvention, for rising from the ashes of a scandalous past to build a life of meaning and purpose. Her journey from the Vatican to Ferrara is a map of resilience, a guide on how to survive the unimaginable and forge a new identity against all odds. In this, she is not just a Renaissance duchess, but a universal figure. The evidence, as we have seen, allows for a powerful and compelling case for her essential innocence regarding the most heinous crimes laid at her feet. The incest and poison allegations crumble under the weight of their own political motivations and a complete lack of credible evidence. The record of her life in Ferrara presents a woman of substance, faith, and capability. To believe the worst of her is to ignore the facts of her later life in favor of the politically expedient fictions of her youth. Yet, to believe her a wholly innocent victim is to ignore the complex, compromising reality of being a Borgia. She was a part of that system. She benefited from its ruthless machinations, and her survival required a degree of complicity. The truth, as it so often is in human affairs, lies not in the absolutes, but in the difficult, murky middle ground. She was a woman of her time, navigating a world of brutal power politics with the tools she had, her wit, her grace, and an unwavering will to survive. In the end, the story of Lucrezia Borgia is a reminder that history is not a science, but a story we tell ourselves. It is a narrative constantly being rewritten, reinterpreted, and reimagined. The facts are the skeleton, but the flesh and blood, the motives, the emotions, the private truths, are lost to us. What remains is the power of the tale itself. Lucrezia's tale is one of the greatest ever told, a sweeping epic of love and betrayal, of sacred power and profane desire, of the relentless pursuit of legacy and the quiet search for peace. It is a story that has captivated us for centuries, and will likely captivate us for centuries more. We are drawn to her not for answers, but for the beautiful, tragic, and endlessly fascinating questions she represents. She is the shadow on the wall of the Renaissance, a whisper in the Vatican corridors, a ghost in the Ferrara gardens, forever elusive, forever enigmatic, and forever, hauntingly, human. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of one of history's most complex and controversial figures. If you were captivated by the dance between legend and reality in the shadow of power, please show your support by leaving a like, subscribing to our channel Timeline Uncovered, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps us continue to bring these fascinating stories from the past into the light until our next journey through history.